Hello, welcome to episode 50. I'm so glad that you are listening today, wherever you are in the world. But sorry now if I sound a bit stuffed up. I have a little head cold at the minute. But I really wanted to record this podcast because, as I mentioned, I am trying to do a few extra podcasts before Christmas. So I think that that's important for people. If you listened to last week's episode, it was my first time having a guest on the podcast, and Lisa was a breath of fresh air. She dove right in and shared with us about her beautiful relationship that she shared with her dog, Duck, who passed away nearly a year ago. And I think that hearing her experience, I'm sure many of you can relate to that and hopefully can feel less alone. And that was definitely something that Lisa wanted to get across is to share her story so that people don't feel so alone. So if you did enjoy that, I will have another guest on in the coming weeks. So I hope that you are kind of liking the mix of different kinds of episodes, which is definitely something that I'm enjoying doing. So I hope that you're also enjoying it. This week, though, if you are a regular listener or if you are a new listener, I hope that you enjoy this solo episode. If you're new to the podcast, the Pet Loss Journals podcast, if you would like to hear more about my personal story, I would definitely recommend going back all the way back to episode 1, because each episode is me sharing different parts of my own pet loss experience, and each episode kind of leads on to the next. So going back to episode 1 will be super beneficial for you to understand my story, why I created the podcast, and my own pet loss experience. So yes, for this week, what I would love to delve into is, which has been a recommendation from a listener who wrote in, which is a really, really good topic for me to cover. And what it is that we're going to talk about anticipatory grief. So the grief that you might be feeling prior to the death of your pet. Specifically, what we're going to focus on is denial, which is one of the most challenging yet natural emotions that we experience as we prepare to say goodbye to a beloved pet that's in our life. I really feel that talking about this particular topic will hopefully make people that are experiencing the end of their pet's life, they'll feel less alone. And denial is something I see often in my work, and it's something I've experienced myself. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it. What is anticipatory grief? So before we dive into denial itself, let's kind of take a moment to define what anticipatory grief is. So this is the grief that we experience when we know a loss is coming, but it hasn't happened yet. And it's common for pet parents and guardians when their pet is diagnosed with, say, a terminal illness, or their pet is elderly and nearing the end of its life, for us to experience this. And unlike the grief after loss, anticipatory grief shows us to process and allows us to process what's happening while our pet is still with us. It's bittersweet, really, because it gives us time to prepare emotionally and mentally, but it can also feel extremely overwhelming at the same time. So denial is definitely sometimes part of anticipating the death of your pet. And that's where we'll kind of spend our focus today on today's episode. So denial is really, in essence, in my opinion, I feel like it's a defense mechanism, and it's our brain's way of protecting us from lots of emotions that feel way too heavy and challenging and overwhelming all at once. So when we're faced with the thought of losing our pet, denial can kind of look like a couple of things. So it may look like avoiding veterinary visits or avoiding going for second opinions because we don't want to hear the bad news. Or it could kind of look like downplaying symptoms like, oh, my pet's just tired, they'll be back to themselves tomorrow, or they'll perk up tomorrow, it's okay. Or even it could look like refusing to talk about the end of life care, or even refusing to kind of talk about euthanasia when it becomes a kind of a necessary conversation. So those are a couple of points to kind of hone in on as to what denial and pet loss might look like. I really want to emphasize that denial itself isn't a weakness. It's not a weakness. It's a natural response. Sometimes it's what allows us to wake up each day and continue caring for our pets that are terminally ill without being completely consumed by sadness. I think that's a really important point. It's a defense mechanism to allow us to get up each day and care for pets that are extremely ill, or care for pets that are extremely elderly, nearing the end of their life, and to continue that caretaking kind of role. But it's something that our brain does naturally to protect us, and it's kind of phenomenal kind of thing that our brain can do, don't you think? But I suppose the impact that denial can have, it has benefits and it has challenges, I guess, and I touched on a couple of them there a minute ago. But on the positive side of things, I guess it can be like a temporary buffer, giving us the space to adjust to the reality of what's happening. It allows us to stay present with our pets, enjoying the time that we have without kind of being totally overwhelmed by grief. But there's a flip side to that, of course. If we stay in denial for too long, it can prevent us from making those important decisions, like I mentioned earlier, like veterinary decisions, euthanasia decisions. So, like for example, delaying discussions about end of life might mean that we miss the opportunity to give our pets the peaceful death that they deserve. Also, it can strain relationships with vets or veterinary staff or loved ones who may be more accepting of the reality, basically. And that's really, really hard to hear, and I can notice that now by saying it. It's really, really hard to hear, but those are the kind of benefits and the challenges. There's positives and negatives to it. But like, how to gently move through denial would be something to kind of consider, and doing it gently. And denial is part of the journey, and moving through it doesn't mean that you have to let go of your hope of love, or let go of the hope that you have that your pet will live longer or recover. Here are a few things, I guess, to start navigating denial, like in a gentle way, because I always say, be gentle on yourself, and you've heard me say that so many times, but I think kind of advice for navigating through that would be like acknowledge your feelings without judgment, without judging yourself. Say to yourself it's okay to feel scared, sad, or even resistant right now. This is like, it's part of the process. So just acknowledge your feelings, but don't judge don't judge yourself, you know. And like start really small steps. You don't have to plan everything at once. You don't have to plan the whole end of life plan all at once. Consider writing down your thoughts or talking to a trusted friend, family member, a safe person. As I've mentioned before, talk to a safe person about your fears, about that element of denial that you're going through. Another one would be to seek information, and I think sometimes denial thrives in that kind of uncertainty. So learning more about your pet's condition can like empower you to have that knowledge to begin to make decisions around end of life. Talk to your vet or find somebody that can help you to plan the end of life. If there's like an end of life nurse or some kind of end of life care plan within the veterinary clinic, perhaps. And like focus on the present moment. So denial can make us feel stuck, but spending meaningful moments with your pet now can help you feel more grounded in the present moment. Our pets are always in the present moment, as you know. So try your best to get into that present moment. And like, don't forget to reach out for support, whether it's a professional, a support group, even someone like me. Like I've helped people through this. You know, having someone to talk to makes all the difference and helps with that denial element when you're anticipating the death of your pet. And I kind of feel that talking about this is definitely important, and I feel that isn't the brain such a wonderful thing that it can try to protect us from such intense emotional pain, because grief is painful and the grieving process has begun before our pets die. And that's the reality, and we want to protect ourselves, and it's normal, it's natural. You know, you don't have to face anticipating the death of your pet and denial. You don't have to face that alone. There's so many others that go through this, and denial is just a tricky part of anticipatory grief. And ultimately, I feel it's also a sign of love. It shows how deeply connected we are with our pets and how much we wish we could hold on to them and have them in our lives forever, for as long as possible, even though we know their lives are much shorter than ours, which we wish every day that they weren't. But I really feel that it's so important to go easy on yourself and be gentle with yourself in a time where there's a lot of uncertainty, but information gathering and, you know, giving yourself that space to acknowledge that you are having feelings of denial and that you are struggling with anticipating the death of your pet, but like in the kindest way possible, to be compassionate towards yourself. And deep down, you want to do everything to make your pet's end of life as beautiful and amazing as it can be. Something that I speak with my clients about is, even though it's very painful, the anticipatory grief that they're feeling, is to really work on being in the present moment with your pet, like I mentioned earlier on. And by doing that, like, if your pet is able, if your pet is well enough to be brought to some places that they love, even if it's just carrying them there if they're very unwell, have like a mini bucket list, but write it from the eyes of your pet. Like, if your pet could write their own bucket list of things that they want to do or they loved doing, and try to take some of those off with your pet. You know, even though you know that maybe the end of their life is approaching, whether you have already decided that euthanasia is the kindest thing to do for your pet, to let them free of that pain, whether you have the euthanasia appointment booked perhaps, try to tick off some of your pet's bucket list items, their little wish list, you know, whether that's their favourite food, their favourite treat, going to see their favourite people, going to their favourite beach, forest, even if you have to put them in a buggy and wheel them along if they're unable to like walk anymore, you know. It's just to try and take some of those off, because that's a way that will also help you in the grieving process, that you've spent that quality time with your pet, that you have been present, that you have looked into your pet's eyes and said all of the things that you want to say, and speaking to your pet out loud, looking into their eyes, telling them what they've taught you, telling them how much you love them, telling them how much you miss them, telling them what joy they brought to your lives, telling them about the times that they helped you through really tough, challenging times in life, telling them all of these things in these special places that they love. It will really, really help to start that healing process and to start to process the pain of their loss prior to them leaving this earth. So I really hope that this conversation resonated with some of you that were listening, and I think having the conversation really reminds me that denial is just a way of the brain protecting you, and also that it didn't mean, when I went through it, it didn't mean that I loved my pet any less. It just meant that I was human. I was being human. I'm human after all. This is why I'm so passionate about supporting people through this. Denial is normal, but you don't have to face it alone. You do not have to face anticipatory grief and denial alone. You're not alone. There are so many others out there that are feeling this. So I do hope that this brought some comfort, some peace to you to listen to this episode. And if there are any other topics that you would like me to cover in a solo episode, I would be more than happy to do so. If you have been enjoying the podcast so far, I would just be so grateful if you could leave a rating on Spotify if you're listening, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and it really helps to get the podcast out there to the people who need it. And if you're not following or subscribing, please do hit that follow or subscribe button, just to keep up to date with all the new episodes that will be coming in the future. Thank you for listening, and I will chat to you soon. Take care.